So, welcome back to Steps and Stories, the podcast where we trace real career journeys to inspire your own. Today's guest has worn many hats, from corporate sales to Ivy League classrooms to the front lines of online discourse. We are thrilled to welcome Dr. Gaurav Sabnis, Assistant Professor at the School of Business, Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey. Dr. Sabnis teaches marketing with special expertise in sales lead generation, follow up processes, social media influence, and more recently, sports marketing. Gaurav is also a prolific writer, one of India's earliest bloggers, with his blog Vantage Point gaining popularity for its honest, thoughtful commentary. Today, his voice resonates with over 50,000 followers on X, entirely grown organically without any blue tick. His takes on marketing, academia, politics, sports, and social issues are as sharp as they are sincere. Fun fact, one of his students during his time at Stevens Tech is none other than MKBHD, the globally renowned tech YouTuber. That just goes to show the reach and influence of Gaurav's approach to teaching and mentorship. So, if you are looking to learn how to stay curious, stay grounded, and still go big, this episode is for you. Let's jump into steps and stories with Dr. Gaurav Sabnis.
Thank you, Amir. Thank you for having me, and it's great to be on this podcast, especially one of the earliest guests on it.
We all as kids have a dream, right? I mean, I'm sure everybody, all of our viewers, you, I, we had a dream. And typically in India, as we grow up, we usually want to become an astronaut or a pilot, or we want to be in the army or something like that. So I will start with this first question for you, Gaurav. What was your childhood dream?
So my childhood dream, I guess, was coming at number 4 for the Indian cricket team in Test matches. But by about age 9 or 10, I figured out that was not going to happen. After that, my dream was to be an astronomer or an astrophysicist. And in Pune, we had frequent contact with Ayuka and Dr. Jen Nadlikar, who was here. So that was my initial dream. That is something I did consider a little bit, but then eventually it's the mercenary side of me took over, which made me realize that maybe I want to do something, or which made me think that I want to do something that first make me some money, because my family had some financial issues in the 90s. And if you grow up at a time where there are financial troubles in your teenagers, you kind of become mercenary in your career planning. So sometimes when I look back, I feel like I could have just gone through with the astronomy astrophysics dream and I would have achieved it quite easily. But hey, I'm still an amateur astronomer. But yeah, that was my original, like, if not number 4 for the Indian cricket team, then I would have liked to be an astronomer or an astrophysicist.
Yeah, I remember we share our love for cricket very much. And during those days, I used to feel that you could become the next Harsha Bhogle for India. And I remember people had that dream for you, and that did not, or you did not take that path. But you're also a great writer. You used to write a lot of blogs in those days. Um, do you think that kind of shaped a little bit of your career?
Oh, yes, for sure. Because when I was in school, I was good at math and I was good at English. So I always thought I could go in either direction. I could go in a field that is more technical, engineering, math related, or I could become a writer, a journalist, something like a Harsha Bhogle, as you were saying. So it always did give me this sense that even if one thing doesn't work out, I have something else to fall back on, which is how my career then unfolded as well, for sure. So having like two complementary set of skills is definitely a good place to be.
Great. I remember you were good at so many things, and like you mentioned, math and English for sure. How much credit do you give to your early education, your schooling days in Abhinav, or even your engineering from COEP? How did these institutions shape you as a person and in your career?
Yeah, I give Abhinav Vidyalaya when I went to school a lot of credit, because this was back then, and I think even now, one of the more cutting edge schools where they were always looking at a more well rounded education. So our teachers were not ultra strict. They were not like, we were one of the schools where a teacher was fired for slapping a student. So we were back in the 80s and 90s, very rare. For an Indian school, they would always be in touch with whatever were the latest developments in education research. They encouraged us to take part in a lot of extracurricular activities. A teacher would take us to quizzes and debates. So that education helped, and plus, of course, the teachers who taught the core subjects were also really good in their field. So it's only after I went to college and other places that I realized that I was very lucky to have a school which was one of the best and where teachers really cared for you. And then later on in COEP as well, like even the couple of early years were really rough. So as you know, we were classmates in engineering. In my first year, I got 3 Fs, but that was all on me because I thought I am such a smart guy that I can just study the last day before the exam and still clear it. And turned out I overestimated myself. But later on, as I figured out and navigated the journey, especially our teachers in the electronics and telecommunication department, the social support generally at COEP, including hanging out at boat club, again the extracurricular like the quiz club, debate club. Like, even now, I like going back to COEP, and again, I realized afterwards that within Pune, that was the best college to attend because in many of the other colleges, it was just go to class, come back, and that's it. And they didn't even have like a proper building, whereas we had like a boat club of our own. So both my school as well as my college gave me this opportunity to kind of explore other sides of my personality, of my dreams or visions. And in that, I feel very lucky because I know not everybody has early education like that.
Yeah, I agree. For becoming a well-rounded person, you need to have these other experiences other than academics. I'm not so sure though that that college should be a restriction, because I know even in your case, I mean, while you were at COEP and you had a lot of opportunities to kind of do stuff at COEP, you also did a lot of stuff outside of COEP. I remember we were in the track club together.
Yeah.
You used to go for quizzes all over the place, right? And I know that COEP's quiz tradition and the quiz club probably gave it a push. But you are the kind of person that who would have done quizzing even otherwise, right? So I want to, I want to hear from you a little bit about how these extracurriculars, so that's stuff other than the regular engineering studies or regular academic studies, help you later on in your career. And do you remember a couple of instances where your maybe your quizzing days or that experience, or maybe your track experience or other experience that you've had in doing extracurriculars has actually helped you in your career?
Yes, for sure. Because in India, many times, and especially during our generation, the focus was so much on textbook learning and just clearing those exams that when you eventually reach, let's say, the quote unquote real world or industry, you realize that you have to do a lot of people management. And there will be opportunities for leadership roles that show up. So, because I've been like a board member of our Rotaract Club and then president of the Rotaract Club, so once I started working in, let's say, IBM or even during my MBA days, whenever there was a group project, I felt that comfort of, let's say, taking on a leadership role, of planning things, or so much in corporate life. The brief corporate life I had is about resource management, and I, as a president of Rotaract at the age of 21, had already done budget management. That this is our budget, and this is what we have to do. And Amey and I used to go and we would pitch our events to different sponsors, and all this we did at the age of 2021. So that also helped, and then that translates into what today people might call soft skills, but I feel like it's more like depth skills rather than soft skills. And eventually, it played as much of a role as formal education in shaping me into who I am. And of course, my communication skills also were a lot better than the average Indian student as a result.
Yeah, I agree. And was that the time where you feel your kind of inclination towards, or that spark for marketing, kind of, was triggered? Because otherwise, during our schooling and engineering, topics like marketing, sales are very alien, right? I mean, we don't even hear about it unless you come across a book or a article mentions which is mentioning that. So we know that there is something called as marketing and sales, but especially our STEM schooling does not really expose us to any of that, right? So how did an MBA at IIM? What was the reason behind doing an MBA after engineering?
Interestingly, if you remember, when I took the CAT, this was back in 2001, it wasn't as common to take CAT. In fact, in our CUEP batch, which was 500 students, there were only 3 of us who took the CAT in that year. Everybody else would go towards GRE. So I'll be honest. I went in for an MBA because even though I was finishing, I started off engineering with 3Fs, but then later on I recovered. But I did realize that electronics engineering is not what excited me enough to, do for life. And in placements, I got a coding job, like most people do. And I knew that I was maybe not going to get a hardware job, which only back then and even now maybe just went to the top 5% of the class. And also, I don't think I was ever that passionate about hardware design or chip design or circuits like many of our classmates were. So the first time I heard about CAT or MBA was in a quiz club, actually. So quizzing is what put me on the path to MBA. So I was at AIT, Army Institute of Technology, where this guy called Kapil Dahiya, he was there, and he had just gone to IIM Ahmedabad, and he was visiting for the quiz. And I was asking him, what is it like? What are you doing? And he was like, oh, I'm doing IIM. It's like IIT, but for management, and you can pick any of these options. And he was like, यार Gaurav, I honestly बताऊं मुझे पता नहीं था मुझे क्या करना है और फिर इसलिए मैंने CAT लिख दी, and that's how I got into it.
Yeah.
And then later on, he was working for sales and marketing in Unilever. So he was the one from whom I first heard, like, oh, this is something that you can do after engineering. It is a way to kind of postpone the decisions of what you want to do about your life. So being perfectly candid.
Yeah.
And so I ended up taking the CAT, and like I said, my family had financial trouble, so GRE and MS were never an option. Even the fees for the CAT in those days, like I had to really convince my dad that, oh, this is something I want. He's like, what is this CAT? I've never heard of it. I said, no, no, just trust me. And yeah, I had the job from campus placement. I think Global Telesystems was the job, but then I got through in CAT, and I got into IIM, and then of course it was a no-brainer to go there because it would, first of all, assure me of a good job. Right? Like if you go to an IIM, you'll get a good job, whether you like it or not. And like I said, I will very honestly admit that in those late teens and early 20s, making sure that there is enough money that I don't have to struggle like I'd seen some in my family struggle was a big priority. So there was that element to it. Then when I went to IIM is when I really got a detailed look at what marketing is, and that is where I realized, oh, this is a field where my quant brain and my qualitative creative brain can both work together. And I eventually what I ended up getting, and so I didn't apply to any of the Unilever's, Pepsi's, and all those jobs because I wanted to be tech marketing. Like even back then, I had that focus. So my dream, and back in those days, you had to put a dream company. And so my dream company was IBM, and I just ended up getting a job offer right after my first interview in IBM, and that was like doing sales and marketing of technology products. What better company than IBM? And back in those days, or even today, like such a wide range of products. So yeah, that was a journey that started off in a mercenary way. Ironically, ended up helping me find who I really am.
But later on, you joined MBA as a in Texans, if am I correct?
Sorry,
In IBM.
yeah, in IBM for server sales. Yes,
for server sales.
Server
so
sales.
you were selling the servers over there.
Yeah. So
wow, interesting. So you were in one of the best companies at that time, and you had a great what do you say, college behind you, so you had a good reputation, and then suddenly you had to leave IBM and you did something else, and it wasn't too long, I think, that you did IBM, right? It was probably a year and a half, 2 years, right? So why did you make that decision? I mean, was there an event that happened, or why was that decision that happened?
Okay. So I should first preface by saying that even during my MBA, they would encourage us to figure out what you want your dream job to be, because in IIM you sit in a room and you'll get a job. They'll just take you to an interview. But when they were asking that, I would often think about what job do I want, and I had a professor called Avinash Mulki. I think later on he moved to IIM Bangalore. Also, quizzing connection. His dad started the Karnataka Quizzing Association, Wing Commander Mulki. So Professor Avinash Mulki was one of my favorite professors. He was a marketing professor, and I liked how he genuinely loved what he did. He had spent a lot of time in the industry, and not only did he love the time in class, but IIM is like a closed campus, far away. And I would see that every evening he and his wife would take a walk around the campus. There's this circular loop of about 3 kilometers, and they were clearly married at least 25, 30 years, but you could see how much in love they were, and he just seemed so much more at peace with life. And when I was thinking about, because our seniors had told us, look at all these people who visit for pre-placement talks and campus visits, and think about which one do you want to be like. And I, even in my second year, was like, I want to be like Professor Mulk. Like, I eventually want to become a professor. So even our yearbook that came out in, every batch in IIMs has its own yearbook, and every student has a page dedicated to them. Even in there, it's mentioned that Gaurav, after working a few years, has plans to become a professor.
Yeah.
So I always had that plan in the back of my mind, but I thought I'll work for maybe 4 or 5 years. Then there was an event that happened, which I know how much you want to go into the details of, but can look up the subness, IIPM, and in short, as Amay mentioned at the start of the podcast, I used to write the blog. It was not a super duper popular blog at that point, but it had a decent number of, let's say, 1,000 followers, 1,000 readers a day, which for 2004 was a pretty, 2005 was a not bad number.
Yeah.
I wrote a blog post just basically bashing IIPM, this now long dead diploma mill essentially, and I said the fraud that is IIPM, and like it's just built on exaggerations, and they just take a lot of money and all that. And I wrote that blog post, and I forgot about it. Like my blog, just like my Twitter today, is like whatever thoughts are in my head, I just want to get them out of my head and move on. Then that school sent me an email saying, "Oh, you need to take down your blog, or we will sue you for 125 crore." And I am one of those guys that, in the flight or fight response, I'm always fight. So I just very aggressively wrote another blog post saying like, "Ah, what a joke," and all that. And I thought that would be the end of it. But these people were extra into bullying, and when somebody is dishonest, they tend to bully even more. And these people were very dishonest. So what they did was they looked me up. I never mentioned IBM on my blog unless maybe in passing. So I never said I'm an IBMer blogging. I was just gauravsubnis.blogspot.com.
Yeah.
But they found out somehow, maybe I must have mentioned in some blog somewhere, they called up IBM and they said that, hey, we buy so many laptops from you, because they had like 7, 8 branches where they would buy hundreds of laptops. They're like, why is your employee trashing us? And so IBM, my boss, called me saying, what's this? I said, well, first of all, IBM is not my client. And this is my personal opinion. I'm writing it on my own. Thankfully, it was IBM. It was not a Lala company, as we would call it, like a very strict one. So they had their own policies. They looked at it. They were like, yeah, you know what? You're right. Like, it's none of our business. This is between you and them. So they told IIPM, whatever he writes is on his own personal time. We cannot do anything. Now, again, this could have ended there. But they created what in marketing is called a Streisand effect. And I was just this one guy whose blog was maybe read at the most by 1,000 people. If they had let me go, everybody would have forgotten about it. But dishonest people who are bullies and who become successful then think that they can keep bullying and keep being successful. So now they counter threaten IBM saying that, oh, if you don't force him to take those things down, we will bring all these laptops in front of the IBM office and we'll make a bonfire of those laptops. Which IBM was and is a media shy company. You very rarely see their CEO or others putting themselves out there. Now, even then, they were, to their credit, they still did not put any pressure on me. But by this time, the whole situation had become so kind of weird that even if I stayed there, like I was, like how it is, like I am a blogger, and like it would still be like that. So I thought, okay, maybe this story has now gone on so far that how about I just what I would have done a couple of years later, which is go for a PhD or something like that. Why don't I do it right now?
Yeah.
So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to quit. So I quit, and that's that because Amit Verma, another podcaster, he's a friend, and he wrote on his blog about it. It got picked up by a few other outlets, and now that suddenly becomes a huge story because this is the first time anybody has heard of somebody quitting a job over a blog, and that to an IBM job, which is a very well-known global company. And then that was this big event. But I also want to stress that even before that happened, I was anyway planning to move to academia. And I'll talk about the reasons about that in a bit.
Sure. Wow, but interesting times because I do remember that people our age were very taken aback by this decision of yours to kind of quit IBM over a blog, and I don't remember for sure, but I know that many of in our friend circle would have also advised you otherwise. So it's okay, let it go, right? I'm sure your family. I mean, how did they cope with this? Because one of the most prestigious companies in the whole world, you were working over there, and you're just leaving it all. Must have been very, very tough for you to even kind of convince your parents and close friends?
Yeah, that's true. It was not an easy decision. Like a couple of close friends were still supportive because those who knew me growing up looked at, okay, once Gaurav gets pushed into a corner, he fights back. He's not going to just sit down. My mom was obviously worried. She's like, you have those education loans. Remember, as I said, we didn't have money when I was growing up. So I had the loan carried over from IM and everything else. And she did feel that, forget, even if not about the money, what if these people send some thugs after you or threaten you or do whatever? And yeah, like I was just, the relationship I was in at that time, she was also not very happy about it. So in general, I did get a lot of pushback. Let me just a blog, who cares? And I'm like, no, like eventually the person I care the most about is me, and I will not respect myself if I just back down over threats. So yeah, like you were one of the friends who were supportive of the decision, saying yes, this is the right thing to do. So the support of a few friends helped. But yeah, overall it was a bit difficult to convince the family and others that that was a smart thing to do. Looking back now, everybody agrees that was a good thing because I landed on my feet. But yeah, it was a tough late 2005 for me for sure.
I'm sure it was a huge event. For much smaller stuff, there is so much of social pressure in India,
Yeah.
right? And this was a huge event. The social pressure at that time was immense. Even I remember those days. It was we were hooked on to the news as to what happens, and you were. I think even mainstream news covered the story quite a bit at that time. Uh, uh, so this kind of a big life event kind of gave a little bit of a different direction to your career, probably slightly earlier than when you wanted. Were there other reasons? And you mentioned your professor who influenced you so much during your MBA days. What were some of the other reasons that you felt like moving from industry to the academy?
Yeah. So one thing was that, and this is something I figured out about myself later, is that I have like this need for variety in my sensory inputs or what I'm doing. So I'm one of those people who cannot really stick to a schedule or a routine. I'm kind of the opposite of that. I need more variety and changes and so on. Now, I was working in sales in IBM and I was doing server sales, and it was really good for the first 6, 8 months and a year. And all my numbers, like even IBM will have the records, I regularly hit my and exceeded my quota of server sales, and it was fun because it was truly combining my technical knowledge, because I had to explain them why a blade server is better than a tower server, because this is the cost of square foot rent in Mumbai, and if you use it, see, this is how much you will save in real estate. And also RAID 5, like why is RAID 5 so special, and SCSI versus SATA and all that. I was able to talk that, but also because I'm a communicator, a people person, all those skills we developed through Rotaract and Quizzin, I could also connect on a personal level, and I could like immediately, convince them, because in sales, a lot of it is about the relationship. Eventually, IBM and HP are not that different, so it has to be about how you're pitching yourself and your product. So it was working out fine, but there were a couple of reasons that made me pretty sure that yes, I have to eventually move to academia. One was very demanding and I dare say toxic work culture in India in general, not just IBM. So even I remember I had hit something like 160% of my quota, and I had just had like a pretty long day with 3, 4 meetings, and it was about 7 o'clock when I was leaving from my office in Bandra complex, and this one guy was like smiling at him, and I had just bought a gift for him because I knew that he liked Bakarwadis a lot, and I just come from Pune. And I was about to tell him that when he saw me walking out, and I was about to tell him that I'll bring that for you tomorrow, and he's like, "Kya aaj half day?" And that still sticks out in my mind. And I know it's fine. He was just like, "I'm joking here." But it was not just that one comment. There was this general culture that my boss, like my super boss at that time, I don't name him because he's a nice guy. Otherwise, he was very blunt. Like 20s and 30s are for working. In your 40s, you can then have a good life and like have fun and all that. And I was like it's always being pushed forward, right? Like, oh, focus on 12th, then everything will be fine. Yeah. Focus on college, then everything will be fine. Now focus on this. I'm like, "Ek kab hone wala hai?" So that was one reason, which is that even though I was doing good at my job, it was just like never enough. And from a peer pressure perspective and from career perspective, I could see that the people who had gotten promoted were the ones who would like just be there till midnight. didn't mean that they were always being productive. You know, there's air conditioning in Bandakula complex and you have internet, so why not? And they have free coffee and all that. Whereas I had a social life outside of work. So my focus would be I will finish my work and then I will have my own life. But I realized that there was an emphasis on just making your corporate life your work life. And I was like, whether it was sales, whether it was IBM, whether it was any company, that was never going to change. And I was like, I thought that in academia I will get more flexibility, more freedom, which I did. So thankfully, it's not a picnic itself. Academia has its own problem, but one thing is that it lets you be your own boss. It lets you, other than of course the courses you're teaching at that time, it lets you set your own schedule. And that independence that was always inside me was kind of hemmed in by the Indian work culture at the very least. And maybe just corporate life for me was not for me long term, I guess.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, the sense that I'm getting is that uh, during these multiple events that happened, some quite big, some quite normal, but you were consciously thinking about what kind of a life you wanted. You were consciously thinking about what kind of a career you would enjoy more. You also mentioned a couple of times you were aware of what your strengths were, and you took some decisions based on, at least after a while you started thinking of, okay, I can use my strengths in a better way in this particular career path. So that's very interesting, because not many people even today, I would say, are aware about what their strengths are, what they want in life, or even if they know what they want, they do not really take steps. And these might be small steps at that time, but they can have a disproportionate impact, right? Throughout your career. I mean, so this one, change that you did, and it wasn't a very small change, but completely changed your trajectory. You went to the US for your doctorate, your PhD, and then after that you've been in academia. I'm a little hazy about your early days in the US. How were they like? I mean, did you enjoy doing PhD in the US? How was that transition? You had worked in the corporate for a couple of years, and then you went over there. Was that an instant kind of a was there an instant attraction for that life that you enjoyed in the university, or was there also some struggle when you kind of made that move from the industry back to the college?
Yeah, that's an excellent question because so if you remember when we were together in COP, I was never into GRE, and even when I was working in India, I never had that US hankering. I never was that, oh, I want to go to the US or I want to move to the US. In my mind, I was going to spend my life either in Pune or in Mumbai, like no other place. And but what ended up happening was when I talked to Professor Mulki and a couple of other professors at IIM, all of them gave. So in my mind, I wanted to have a career like Professor Mulki's, where I would work for maybe my 20s and 30s, then I would teach on the weekends. I had another colleague called Rupesh Gandhi, and I used to already do some weekend teaching at which was at SP Jain. So he had worked for 4 or 5 years. Like after you work for 4 or 5 years, colleges are good to let you be an adjunct professor. So initially I thought that's what I would do, but my professors at IIM, and again here I'll credit them, they were like, no, no, don't do this. He said that if you want to have the best possible options, what you need to do is you need to apply and get a PhD from the US. Don't do FPM. So because IIMs have this thing called FPM, it is their equivalent of the PhD fellowship program in management.
Okay.
And that is to prepare people to become academics and faculty. All my professors at IIM said that you should go to the US. Once you get a PhD from US, then you can work in any country in the world. You come back to India, any IIM, like pretty much any IIM will take you. You can work at IIT School of Management. Like so, back at that time, that was my dream job. I wanted to be a marketing professor at the Shailesh Mehta School of Management at IIT Bombay, live in Powai, like all that. That was at that time, that was my North Star, so to say.
Okay.
And so that's how that's why I went to the US again, always planning to come back. But to go to what your point of your question was, that I quit pretty fast. Like as soon as I was there, it wasn't that. I mean, the challenges come from, of course, like the actual coursework and everything. But in terms of fitting into the US culture, maybe because I went there relatively late, I was 26, as opposed to my other friends who just go straight from living at home with parents and going to college straight to the US. I had lived as an adult on my own in Mumbai and all that. Like I've been paying my own bills, taking care of my own meals, getting my clothes like washed. So I was a grown up when I moved to the US, and in that sense, I did adjust pretty easily to life over there because it didn't seem like a very foreign place. This was also the world where we had a lot of internet, where we had TV, so it didn't feel like a foreign country. It just seemed like something I was expecting. What was different were the expectations, and just the academic culture was very different. Like, which I can get into in a little more detail.
Sure. Uh, the reason for you adjusting so quickly, was it also because, and I'm just imagining over here, was it also because you are a very well-read person. I mean, you used to read voraciously even at that time. I remember I used to be very surprised that how can this guy read a book in a day sometimes, and then you already had a new book which you wanted to read the next day. So did that help? I mean, did that help? Did watching some of these? You mentioned TV and watching some of these American serials or sitcoms at that time. Did that also help? I mean, what do you think?
Yes, it helped big time because the US is a very, like, you've lived in the US for many years, so it is a very social, talkative place, and they always try to find common ground with you. And if you display that you have some common ground that is natural, then they really like you. So it would happen. I was at Penn State for 5 years, and I moved to Pennsylvania, and I'd read a lot about Pennsylvania. I read about how Pittsburgh was built, the history of Philadelphia. I had, of course, had all the TV that we used to watch back then on cable. So I like watched all of Seinfeld and Friends. So I had enough. So when I went in 2006, as opposed to, let's say, somebody from India who went in 1976, I had a much more of a reference. And as you said, I had read so many books. So we would talk about, I, if I was in a bar or if I was talking with a faculty member or just hanging out at a party, because of all the reading that I did and just the media I consumed, be it in TV form or blogs, which were big then, I was able to always find something some interest that we had in common, and that did help me settle, like, fit in very easily.
It's very interesting, and it's a good takeaway, I guess, for all our listeners also, that it is not just reading for the sake of it, but it can help you in developing your career, in networking, even in finding mentors, right? Because if you can speak with somebody, if you can just break the ice with somebody easily, then that can open up so many doors. So in the earlier days, I know you had a huge network even in India. I don't know so much about in the US, but you are now mentioning that it helped you kind of reach out to people and strike a conversation easily. Did networking, play a big role in your career in the earlier days?
Uh, yes, for sure. I mean, as you know, I've always been a very social person. So wherever I go, it's not with like what's in it for me. I just, like, my mom tells me when I was a baby, when I was as a kid, when we would go on train journeys, she said that once we got to backstage, I would apparently just go up and down the compartment to Acha, who is this? Hi, hello, like, just trying to make friends with people. So in that sense, the networking helped because a friend of a friend recommended, first of all, Penn State. So I was, back then we didn't have, even now there is not too much knowledge about how do you do a PhD in business or in marketing. But a friend connected me to this woman called Seema Pai, who was also in a PhD program, who's now into the food business, by the way, who then connected me to Raj Garewal, who eventually ended up being my advisor. So, and at that time, I also ended up getting an extra $7,500 scholarship because of that. Then later on, as I was finding jobs, as when I was on the job market again, like, people knew about me or somebody would introduce me to somebody else. And in terms of getting research resources, access to company data, yeah, always that networking has helped. And I think what helps is all that was not what I would call networking, as in like you get together over wine or whatever, but just making that personal, genuine connection. So even recently, one of my old colleagues from IBM Mumbai he saw on Twitter, he still following me, like, hey, next time you're in India, you should come and you should stop by and we'll talk. And one of my channel partners, because I used to be a channel manager for IBM, he also reached out. He's like, oh, I've been following you throughout and all that. And because, there is no quid pro quo in there. But at the same time, it does help if, because anybody will always want to help their friends or whom they're close to. Yeah, like a big role.
Yeah. Very interesting. I mean, while you were talking, I was just thinking, because I do talk a lot to students and young professionals about why they should plan their career, how they should plan their career. It is not always that what you plan is going to play out exactly like you planned, but uh, you are catapulted in a general correct direction, and then you have all of this network effect. You join some communities, you have some mentors, you find a friend of a friend who will give you a great advice, and then you get attracted to a kind of a new kind of a path which might be in the same general direction. And while talking to you, I felt like you had a lot of clarity about yourself, and that kind of put you in the right direction. And then once you started taking that right direction, I mean, even though you had the plan then to come back to IIT Powai and teach over there, even if that did not happen, I mean, you still had a generally fulfilling career. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like once I had that clarity, and I would say that, maybe it was in IIM at that moment of clarity of like, oh, ideal job is marketing professor, and once and then that became like my north star, so to say. Now, one of the things is during my PhD, soon when I was going on the job market, of course, that was right after the Great Recession. A lot of universities had cut their budgets and so on. So there was a moment when I was like, oh my God, have I made the right decision? And now at that time, I had fallen in love with a woman who was from the US. And by that time, honestly, I felt like my personality was a better fit with the US society and the US academic world as opposed to back here, where it can be a little constricting. And, we have like know how I am. So by that time, I had like kind of thought that I will end up in the US, but I was still open to the idea of maybe moving to Europe, or even if maybe even coming back to India, because because of the Great Recession, there were just not as many jobs. So there were a couple of years, but even during that, I never thought that I want to go back to industry, for example. So even at the most uncertain times of my career, where I had before I ended up in my tenure track position, there was a 1 year position I had, which was very uncertain, like a very competitive time. Every other week, I was flying out for a campus visit, which is an interview. And an academia, an interview lasts 2 days. It's a long interview. So it's a very demanding process. But even at that time, I knew that I could just go back to industry and I'd have a job for me. But it just like the change I made was so satisfying to me, even at the worst of times, even at the most challenging of times in academia. That yeah, now that things are well, like I got a few papers, got 10 years. Yes, it has ended up being a very satisfying journey for sure.
Because there is not a lot of awareness about research in India, and you went deeper into research.
Yeah.
In your PhD, I'm sure there were a lot of challenges, but you eventually published a lot of papers. You won awards, right? Is it very tedious? Is it very difficult, as as it might seem to some of us who've not done that?
Short answer is yes. It is tough and tedious. Like you have to like it enough to take it on, right? Like I'll give you a cricket analogy. So one of the things, like Sachin Tendulkar, great batter, great technique, great talent, and all that. But one of the things that is often spoken about him is how long he practiced every single day. That even after he came back from a series, like he would go to that Gymkhana in Bandra, and he was just practicing and practicing and practicing. Right. So even the best of the batters that we've seen, the most talented person is still putting in that extra hours and going in the nets, right? And if you played in the nets, that can get boring after a while. Like playing a match can be fun, but just being in the nets or just practicing, practicing, practicing. So research is very tough. Research, most of the things are a dead end. You think I'll go in this direction, you do some analysis, it doesn't work. Every paper of mine that has been published and even not published is probably its 500th draft that is published. So you write the first draft, then you're like, okay, this has to be changed. Then you read it again, and then you read it again. So it's not for everyone. I will say that for sure. Like you have to have that kind of a bent of mind towards it. But I would think about P.G. Woodhouse, who was one of my favorite authors growing up. That his books feel so natural and they just flow so easily.
Yeah.
But I read that it was for him also. He would like start writing. He would put up a page, then he would look at it, take it down, replace it again. That every line that seemed like very flawless and very effortless from PG Woodhouse actually took 100 different tries before he landed on it. So yeah, in research you have to have that real focus and you have to be willing to just accept rejection from reality. So in research often you're facing rejection from in corporate life you'll be facing rejection from people, But in academia, it's rejection from reality or science or logic that many times you just have to live with, and many times you just have to kill a project. Like I've killed a couple of papers that I poured hundreds of hours into, but I was like, you know what, this isn't going anywhere, or this will not get published. So yeah, the short answer is yes. It's a tough field, but if you love it, then it's the best thing to do.
When you mentioned about those 500 drafts, I mean, just because what's happening today in the world, the whole AI revolution, I'm curious to ask, I mean, has it become easier now with all these LLMs? You can just create 500 drafts. Some people might be thinking that, it's very easy nowadays to write anything. What do you think about that?
In some ways it is, like, because I have come from a pre-AI world, right? So I try to minimize how much I use. It definitely helps a lot in my teaching, because earlier, let's say I had to make a graph. So for example, something as simple as showing what a p-value means or what two distributions look like. I had to either write down the code, write down a macro myself in Excel or whatever, or just create those data points. Now I can just tell AI to do that, right? So it has made research definitely easier in terms of the extra things like the tables, figures, and all that. And writing wise, I'm personally still a skeptic in how much it will help and how much it will hurt, because eventually it's not artificial. Eventually it is just an advanced form of Google or programming or whatever it is, and we don't know what is inside that black box of the neural nets. So it does help getting you started. It will of course help catch spelling mistakes, typos, etc. But the core of what writing is, I don't think will be changed as much by AI, because people like it's if you think about SEO, like search engine optimization, people are like, oh, this is how I can get my ads, my results up there. But then Google also reacts and other people react. So I think even with AI, the same thing is going to happen, which is that, yeah, right now it feels like, oh, it'll just spit out an essay.
Yeah.
But I think that there'll be adjustments from both sides where it will just end up being like spell check, or it'll end up being like, what was that? Autocomplete. So sure, autocomplete is there, but eventually you still need some originality on your own.
Absolutely. Do you see in your class, because you teach very regularly, that because of AI and because of COVID, people are less and less inclined to kind of learn offline nowadays? I mean, how do you see that in your university in the US?
Yeah, I mean, the AI has definitely had an impact in that. And honestly, we were all students and kids once, right? So if you have you are mainly often just thinking about your grade. You want to make sure that I'm getting a good grade, I'm getting good marks, and whatever helps you, whatever the means to that end are good. Like today, we can sit in our 40s and be like very idealistic. You should focus on education and all that. So there is definitely that challenge where when I'm giving an assignment, I don't know if the student is turning in an actual, their work or not. And for me personally, it did have an impact, because I've been very conscious about making sure there's no plagiarism and cheating and all that. But the first time I really caught what is very clear plagiarism was post-COVID. And three different students doing that. And later on, again, I caught a couple of students using AI. So one thing I do nowadays is if I assign them an essay or something, I will then have them also present it. So it's okay, even if AI has written it and it has good content, it will at least, when they present it, they will at least get to know it. Because, as of now, AI cannot do presentations. So that at least will make sure it is like that. The second thing I do is I give them a topic. Let's say one of my essays was analyze. Sorry, what was the last one? Yeah, one of my things was analyze the rise and fall of Tesla stock in the last 2 years. It has been a very volatile stock, and there's a lot of learning in there every time it has risen or fallen. And then I told them, listen, I opened up ChatGPT Copilot in front of them. I'm like, I'm going to tell it, write me a 1,000-word essay on the fluctuations of Tesla stock, and it will spit out an essay. I'm like, write me another essay on this topic, spit it out. Write me another essay, spit it out. So I get 10 of those essays, and then I tell students, okay, look at this. Look at this. Look at this. After the fourth essay and fifth essay, do you see something? You start noticing that it's basically just saying the same thing. Whereas a human essay will not be that way. Because AI is still at the end of the day just trying to fit what is the best possible answer. It has no idea what is the ground truth.
Correct.
So that has helped, I think, students themselves, because it's like how we were the first generation to have the internet, right?
Yeah.
So we could have used it to do a lot of things that our professors didn't do.
Yeah.
So they would have given us, let's say, some chip design assignment, and we could have just gone online and got it. They are in that stage, and yes, but I feel like it is just a temporary blip. Just like every new technology is first viewed with suspicion, then we think it is the end of the world, and then eventually it just becomes commonplace. So I thinking taking a big picture thing, yeah. So the short answer is both COVID and AI have changed the way students learn and their willingness to learn. But if you show them something interesting, then they will still put their own effort in it.
As we come to the first part, Gaurav, I wanted you to kind of share with us your current, passions. I know you mentioned you teach sports marketing. You are also very interested in tech marketing, and you also have been doing a lot of research on social media marketing. So, for youngsters or students who are envisioning their careers in marketing, what would you tell them? How do they prepare themselves, for a great career in marketing?
Yeah, so in my early years, 15 years ago, when I finished my PhD and got into academia, thrust was all about analytics, like numbers, quant. If you want to do marketing, you have to now do analytics. You jump into the numbers, the data, and that's what I taught a lot. Also, marketing analytics at the graduate level, at the undergraduate level. A big shift I'm seeing in the last few years is that with AI, one thing that is going to happen is that skill of coding, of quant, isn't going to be as much of a differentiator as it was in our generation or even a generation after that. Because and I did a great experiment for this. So in my PhD, when I was finishing my PhD, in the US it generally means three papers in business. So in other fields it is just one huge dissertation like a book. In our university and my advisors had three essays. So like first paper, second paper, third paper, all on a common topic. So I had my first two finished, and then my last semester I was working on this thing where I was trying to analyze data from YouTube videos. So based on how people have reviewed airlines or certain things on YouTube, I was collecting the data. Excuse me. And then I had to do this Bayesian Markov chain Monte Carlo modeling because I had this specific kind of data, and there was no box product for it. So SPSS or SAS. There was nothing in which I could just be like, hey, I want to run this analysis. I would have had to write my own code in C or in Python, but that time I wasn't using Python as much. So at that time I just had to write a code in C, C++ that I knew. It took me about 2 months to first learn the statistics behind that the Bayesian program that I was going to run. Then I had to give a bunch of these specifications. It took me about 2 months of working roughly 8 hours, 8 to 10 hours a day in my office, in my PhD student's office. And I had to work step by step. And then recently I was wondering, so I went to ChatGPT and I just described what I wanted to do. Like, can you write me a C++ code? It spat out almost exactly the code I had written. That it took me 2 months to write, and this thing spat it out in like half a second. So my end story here is I feel like we are going to see a return like from marketing analytics to marketing humanities or marketing arts and sciences, that it's going to be about understanding the human being now. And it's about cutting through the clutter of the numbers and the mountains of data to being able to understand, oh, why, let's say, does this thing happen here but not there? And many times it is a human who can understand better than a program. So for those who are interested in marketing, I would say that it would be good to take courses like sociology, like psychology, like anthropology. Because at the end of the day, the decisions we make are not based on numbers, but who we are as people. And who we are as people is better explained by sociology, psychology, anthropology than by calculus or programming or statistics.
Excellent advice. I think we've had a great conversation, just tracing your journey up till here, Gaurav. In the next part or in the next session, I would like to cover a lot about your vision, your passions, what kind of purpose you have in life or what has shaped you. And again, a lot of reflections and advice that you might have for youngsters who are starting their careers now. So we'll just take a short break and come back and talk to you again in the second part. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.